Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I am live on Facebook and live here on YouTube, and also Odyssey is supposed to be recording it. But I'm having a little issue with that. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to continue reading chapter 4 of this particular book, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. This is by Anthony C. Sutton, and who was a professor at Stanford University. And this was written probably in the mid 70s or early 70s, I should say, this particular book. So let's go to chapter 4 here. Hope that all is doing well today. Again, it's important that you understand what has happened in the past so that you can understand what is going to take place in the future. Chapter 4. It's called Wall Street and the World Revolution. What you radicals and we who hold opposing views different about is not so much the end of the means, not so much about what should be brought about as how it should and can be brought about. This is by Otto H. Kahn, KHN, Director of American International Corporation and partner with Coombe, Lowe and Company, speaking in the League of Industrial Democracy in New York, December 30th, 1924. Before World War I, the financial and business structure of the United States was dominated by two conglomerates, that is Standard Oil, or the Rockefeller Enterprise, and the Morgan complex of industries, finance, and transportation companies. Rockefeller and Morgan Trust alliances dominated not only Wall Street, but through interlocking directorships, almost the entire economic fabric of the United States. Rockefeller's interests monopolized the petroleum and allied industries and controlled the copper trust, the smelters trust, and the gigantic tobacco trust, in addition to having influence in some of Morgan's properties, such as the U.S. Steel Corporation, as well as in hundreds of smaller industrial trusts. Public service operations, railroads, and banking institutions. National City Bank was the largest of the banks influenced by Standard Oil/Rockefeller, but financial control extended to the United States Trust Company and Hanover National Bank, as well as to major life insurance companies such as Equity Life and Mutual of New York. The great Morgan enterprises were in steel, shipping, and electrical industries. They included General Electric, the Rubber Trust, and railroads. Like Rockefeller, Morgan controlled financial corporations, the National Bank of Commerce and the Chase National Bank, New York Life Insurance, and Guaranty Trust Company. The names J.P. Morgan and Guaranty Trust Company occur repeatedly throughout this book. In the early part of the 20th century, the Guaranty Trust Company was dominated by the Harriman interests, Harriman. When the elder Harriman, that is Edward Henry, died in 1909, Morgan Associates bought into Guaranty Trust as well as into Mutual Life and New York Life, which all of those are the last two are major life insurance companies, and they're still around. In 1919, Morgan also brought control of Equity Life and Guaranty Trust Company, absorbing additional 6 lesser trust companies, that is. Therefore, at the end of World War I, the Guaranty Trust and Bankers Trust were, respectively, the first and second largest trust companies in the United States, both dominated by the Morgan interests. So what we're seeing here, this takeover here of what I would call corporations, and they're becoming to use their power because they're now either bought a bank out or actually working with banks and to getting their loans and to be able to continue to expand and to buy out competition in a lot of ways, or to control the competition, especially the railroad industry and also the steel industry. American financiers associated with these groups were involved in financial revolutions even before 1917. Intervention by the Wall Street law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell into the Panama Canal controversies recorded in 1913 congressional hearings. The episode is summarized by Congressman Rainey, R-A-I-N-E-Y. It's my contention that the representatives of the government, that is the United States, make possible the revolution on the Isthmus of Panama. That had it not been for the interference of this government, a successful revolution could not possibly have occurred, and I contend that the government violated the Treaty of 1846. I will be able to produce evidence to show that the Declaration of Independence, which was promulgated in Panama on the 3rd day of November 1903, was prepared right here in New York City and carried down there, prepared in the office of Wilson and Nelson Cromwell. What this is about is that Panama was just an isthmus. It was part of Colombia. What they decided to do was create a revolution there and to actually break apart Panama so that it became its own country. This was all done. This is their plans, you see. So this is their purpose in this whole idea. So what's happening is this, that they have a plan. Their plan is simply this: to destroy another country or take something from it or divide it, whatever they got to do, in order to benefit themselves. Okay? And that's what they did here. And this was also during this time period of Theodore Roosevelt's particular administration, dealing with what he called the big stick. That is, he was beginning to use what I would call the not only diplomacy but military, the Navy, in a way of actually controlling other countries, especially in Central America and in South America. Congressman Rainey went on to state that only 10 or 12 of the top Panamanian revolutionists, plus the officers of the Panama Railroad and Steamship Company, were under the control of William Nelson Cromwell of New York and the State Department officials in Washington, knew about the impending revolution. The purpose of the revolution was to deprive Colombia, of which Panama was then a part, of $40 million and to acquire control of the Panama Canal. Now remember, there was already a canal there being built, and I'm trying to remember. I know that I thought the British were involved, but I don't know if the Spanish. I would have to look at the book. I just kind of went over this, but the point simply is that my contention here simply is that it failed because of what we call yellow fever. That's what we're told. And there was a particular gentleman who was able to deal with malaria at that time, and he was a naval officer or naval doctor, and I know his name, and I can't seem to, at this point, can't remember his name, but he was involved, and he was able to actually find a remedy to dealing with this whole issue. The best documented example of Wall Street intervention in revolution is the Operation in New York Syndicate in the Chinese Revolution of 1912, which was led by Sun Yat-sen. That's S-U-N, Yat-sen. Although the final gains of the syndicate remain unclear, the intentions and role in New York financial groups are fully documented down to amounts of money, information on affiliated Chinese secret societies, and shipping lists of armaments to be purchased. The New York bankers syndicate for the Sun Yat-sen revolution included Charles B. Hill, attorney with the law firm of Hunt, Hill, and Betts. In 1912, the firm was to locate at 165 Broadway, New York, but in 1917, it moved to 120 Broadway. See Chapter 8 for significance of this address. Charles B. Hill was director of several Westinghouse subsidiaries, including Bryant Electric, Perkins Electric Switch, and Westinghouse Lamp, affiliate with Westinghouse Electric, whose New York office was also located at 120 Broadway. Charles R. Crane, organizer of Westinghouse subsidiaries in Russia, had a known role in the first and second phases of the Bolshevik Revolution. So, it's about money, folks. It's about taking from others, and it's also coming in and going to another country and say, here, we got something for you, and you're going to have to buy it. See. The work of the 1910 Hill Syndicate in China is recorded in the Laurent Booth's papers. I'll spell that to you, Laurence. Booth is Boothe papers at the Hoover Institute, which is actually located at, it's at Stanford itself, the university. These papers contain over 110 related items, including letters of Sun Yat-sen to and from the American backers. In return for financial support, Sun Yat-sen promised the Hill Syndicate railroad, banking, and commercial concessions in the new revolutionary China. Another case of revolution support by New York financial revolutions concerned that of Mexico in 1915 and 1916. Von Ritteten, spelled Rintelen, a German espionage agent in the United States, was accused during his May 1917 trial in New York City of attempting to embroil the U.S. with Mexico and Japan in order to divert ammunition then flowing to the Allies in Europe. So this is during the war. Payment for the ammunition that was shipped from the United States to the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa was made through Guarantee Trust Guarantee. Von Remington's advisor was Sommerfeld, Sommerfeld, paid $380,000 via Guarantee Trust and Mississippi Valley Trust Company to the Western Carters Company of Alton, Illinois for ammunition shipped to El Paso for forwarding to Villa. This was as of mid-1915. On January 10, 1916, Villa murdered 17 American miners at Santa Isabel, and on March 9, 1916, Villa raided Columbus, New Mexico, and killed 18 more Americans. Wall Street involvement in these Mexican border raids was the subject of a letter based upon October 6, 1916, from Lincoln Stephens, again, American communist, to Colonel House on aid to Woodrow Wilson. This is something you got to be aware of. This is all occurring under the Woodrow Wilson's administration. Woodrow Wilson was a very naive president, or he was so filled up with ego that he basically couldn't see what he was actually doing. And you can see this is all, this is the attitudes changed. All this attitude changed, all actually changed a lot after the war between the states. That is the Civil War in the South. The South lost. When the South lost, which was what I would call the states' rights, many things occurred under Woodrow Wilson, which were what I would call very revolutionary in his administration, immensely. Okay, my dear Colonel House, just before I left New York last Monday, I was told convincingly that Wall Street had completed arrangements for one more raid of Mexican bandits into the United States, to be so timed and so atrocious that it would settle the election. Once in power in Mexico, the Carranza government purchased additional arms in the United States. The American Gun Company contracted to ship 5,000 Mausers, and a shipment license was issued by the War Trade Board for 15,000 guns and 15 million rounds of ammunition. The American ambassador to Mexico was Fletcher, flatly refused to recommend or sanction the shipments of any munition, rifles, etc. to Casario. However, intervention by Secretary of State Robert Lansing reduced the barrier to one of a temporary delay, and in a short while, the American Gun Company would be permitted to make the shipments and delivery. See, this is all about making money too. It's about also killing people. It's also destabilizing a government also, and allowing someone else to get in too. These are all what they do. The raids upon the U.S. by Villa and the Carranza's forces were reported in the New York Times as the Texas Revolution, kind of a dry run for the Bolshevik Revolution, and were undertaken jointly by Germans and Bolsheviks. Didn't know that. The testimony of John A. Walls, District Attorney of Brownville, Texas, before the 1919 Fall Committee yielded documented evidence of the link between Bolshevik interests in the United States, German activity, and the Carranza forces in Mexico. Consequently, the Carranza's government, the first in the world with a Soviet-type constitution, which was written by Trotskyites, was a government with support on Wall Street. The Carranza evolution probably could not have succeeded without American munitions. and Carranza would not have remained in power as long as he did without American help. Similar interventions in the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia revolves around Swedish banker and intermediate Ola Ashberg. We talked about him before. Logically, this story begins with pre-revolutionary Tsarist loans by Wall Street bank syndicates. American bankers and Tsarist loans. So this takes place before the revolution that takes place in Russia. In August of 1914, Europe went to war. Under international law, neutral countries and the United States were neutral until April of 1917, could not raise loans for belligerent countries. This was a question of law as well as morality. When the Morgan House floated war loans for Britain and France in 1915, J.P. Morgan argued that there were not war loans at all, but merely a means of facilitating international trade. Such a distinction had indeed been elaborately made by President Wilson in October 1914. He explained that the sale of bonds in the U.S. for the foreign government was in effect a loan of savings to belligerent government and did not finance a war. Folks, you got to understand, all this connects, all of it, it connects back to the Federal Reserve. The treacherous thing that took place with that taking place, and giving the responsibility to private bankers instead of the federal government. This is important for you to understand because this allows them now to create money, okay? And they're now using the U.S. money and using it eventually to prop up not only starting a war in Europe, but also with the Bolsheviks in Russia, and also you see in even issues going on in Mexico. On the other hand, acceptance of treasury notes of other evidence of debt and payment for articles was only a means of facilitating trade and not of financing a war effort. It's amazing. It just blows your mind. And they were also involved, like I said, here with the issue with Panama, also with China. The United States has now become very active in this. Now, the key is simply is this being done by the United States government or is it being done by Great Britain? Because we know that Great Britain is also involved in a lot of this, in fact, especially the war in Europe. And they're also involved in that. And Tavistock probably plays a lot to do with it also. Documents to the State Department files demonstrate the National City Bank, controlled by Stillman and Rockefeller interests, and the Guarantee Trust, controlled by Morgan's interests, jointly raised substantial loans for the belligerent Russia before U.S. entry into the war, and that these loans were raised after the State Department pointed out to these firms that they were contrary to international law. Further, negotiations for the loans were undertaken through official U.S. government communications facilities under the cover of the top-level green cipher, CIPHER, of the State Department. Below are extracts from State Department cables that will make the case. So again, Mr. Sutton is he's getting his evidence based upon what he has communiques that have now been that have been shown that they're communicating. On May 4, 1916, Ambassador Francis in Petrograd sent the following cable to the State Department in Washington for forwarding to Frank Arthur Vanderlip, which was then the chairman of the National City Bank. This is all connects here enormously, folks. Connects to the Federal Reserve because Vanderlip was at the Allen, I know the name of the bank. I know the name of Allen. Jekyll Allen. Arthur Vanderlip was there. He was involved in that. This is all taking place, folks. It didn't take him a year or two to start all this stuff. They started all these wars, the takeover, revolutions. Everything is taking place. It connects. All of it does. Because the United States, this would not have happened. Because if the United States Treasury was minting money, as they should be, this would have never taken place. But since they gave this to a bunch of 6 private bankers, 2 I think are in the United States, 2 is from Germany. I know there's 1 in France and probably 1 in Britain. It benefited them because they wanted to make money off of wars and to kill people. Okay. This would have never have happened. None of it. And was encrypted and deciphered by the U.S. State Department officers in Petrograd and Washington at the taxpayers' expense. The Vanderlip National City Bank, New York, 5, that is, our previous opinions credit strengthened. We endorse planned cable on safe investment plus very attractive speculation in rubles. In view of guarantee of exchange rates, have placed rate somewhat above present market. Owing unfavorably opinion created by long delay have an ongoing responsible offer take $25 million. $25 million is a lot of money back then, folks. It still is, but that's a big piece of money. We think large portions of all should be retained by bank and ally institutions. What they're doing is investing their money, and they're going to benefit from that, you see. Well, clauses respect custody. It's a big money deal, too. Big. You see, they're not looking just here in the United States now. They're looking elsewhere to begin to spread out, to take, to have people in certain countries so that they will take this money and begin to destroy other countries or to create, keep certain people in power and to create a war. We think large portions of all should be retained by bank and ally institutions with clause respect customs bonds become practical lien on more than $150 million per annum. Customs making a absolute security and secured market even if defect. We consider 3 years option on bonds very valuable, and for this reason, amount of ruble credit should be enlarged by group or by distribution to close friends. American International should take block, and we would inform government. Think group should be formed at once to take and issue a bond. Should secure full cooperative guarantee. SUC Jack personally use every endeavor to get them really to work. Otherwise, cooperate guarantee from the new group. And it's all kind of done just because this is actually a cable. Opportunities here during the next 10 years very great along state and industrial financing. And if the transaction consummates, doubtless should be established and answering bear in mind situation regarding cable. Mac Roberts, Rich. Francis, that is American ambassador. There are several points to note about the above cable to understand the story that follows. First, note the reference to American International Corporation, a Morgan firm, and a name that turns up again and again in the story. I've never even heard of this company, folks. Is it a conglomerate or is it a fake group? You see, that's my thoughts here. Second, guarantee refers to Guarantee Trust Company. Third, McRoberts was Samuel McRoberts, a vice president and executive manager of National City Bank. On May 24th, 1916, Ambassador Francis cabled a message from Rolf, R-O-L-P-H, Marsh of Guarantee Trust in Petrograd to Guarantee Trust in New York, again in the special green cycle and again using the facilities of the State Department. This cable reads as follows. May 24, 6 p.m. for Guarantee Trust Company of New York. Olaf and self consider the new proposed proposition takes care, that is, of Olaf and will help rather than harm your prestige. Situations such cooperation necessary if big things are to be accomplished here. Strongly urge your arranging with National City Bank, to consider and act jointly in all big propositions here. Decided advantageous for both and prevents playing one against another. City representatives here desire is handwritten such cooperation. Proposition being considered eliminates our credit and name with options, but we both consider the ruble credit with the bond option and propositions. Second paragraph offers wonderful probable opportunities. Strongly urge your acceptance. Please cable me full authority to act in connection with city. Again, he's talking about National City Bank. Consider our entertaining proposition satisfactory situation for us and permit doing big things. Again, strong urge your strongly urge your taking 25 million of ruble credit, they'll possibly lost, and decide speculator advantage. Again, urge having vice president upon the ground. Back here will be decidedly good. Resident attorney does not carry same prestige and weight. This goes through embassy by code. Answers same way. See cables on possibilities. So Rolf, R-O-L-P-H, Marsh, and Francis, American ambassador. Note, entire message in green cipher. Again, this is another telegram saying it. So it's going to be all jumbled up. So you got to understand that. Olaf, the cable was Olaf Oshberg, Swedish banker and head of the Niles banker in Stockholm. Ashborg had been in New York in 1915, conferring with the Morgan firm on these Russian loans. Now in 1916, he was in Petrograd with Rolf Marsh of Guarantee Trust and Samuel Roberts and Rich of National City Bank, arranging loans for Morgan Rockefeller Consortium. The following years, Ashborg, as we shall see later, would be known as the Bolshevik banker. And his own memoirs reproduce evidence of his right to the title. The State Department files also contains a series of cables between Ambassador Francis, acting Secretary Frank Polk, and Secretary of State Robert Lansing concerning the legality and propriety of transmitting the National City Bank and Guarantee Trust cables at public expense. See, these people are doing this underhanded, but yet it's going to cost taxpayers money. These guys are crooked, folks. And they got people in their office doing this. You think this was going over 100 years ago? What do you think is going on now? It's worse now. On May 25th, 1916, Ambassador Francis cables watched as follows and refers to the two previous cables. There's another cable. My telegram 563 and 565, May 24, are sent for a local representative of the institutions addressed in the hope of consummating a loan which would largely increase international trade and greatly benefit, that is, diplomatic relations. They always say that. No, it's business, folks. Prospects for success promising. Petrograph representatives consider terms submitted very satisfactory, but fear such representation to their institution would prevent consignation loan if government here acquainted these proposals. Back to Francis, American ambassador. This is all being done. It's amazing. The basic reason cited by Francis for facilitating the cables is the hope of consummating loan, which would largely increase international trade. Transmission of commercial messages using State Department facilities had been prohibited, and on June 1st, 1916, Pope cabled Francis stating, in view of department regulations contained in the circular telegraphic instructions on March 15, discontinuation of forwarding commercial messages. 1915, please explain why messages in your 563, 565, and 575 should be communicated. Hereafter, please follow closely department instructions. Then on June 8, 1916, Secretary of State Lansing expands the prohibition and clearly states that the proposal loans were illegal. Of course they were. Before delivering messages to Vanderlip and Guarantee Trust Company, I must inquire whether they refer to Russian government loans of any description. If they do, I regret that the department cannot be a party to their transmissions, as such action would submit it to justifiable criticism because of participation by this government in loan transactions by belligerent for the purpose of carrying on its hostile operations. Such participation is contrary to the acceptance rule of international law that neutral governments should not lend their assistance to the raising of war loans by belligerents. The last line of the Lansing cable, as written, was not transmitted to Petrograd. The line read, cannot arrangements be made to send these messages through Russian channels? How can we assess these cables and the parties involved? Clearly, the Morgan Rockefeller interests were not interested in abiding by the international law. There is obviously intent in these cables to supply loans to belligerents. There was no hesitation on the part of these firms to use State Department facilities for the negotiation. Further, in spite of protests, the State Department allowed the messages to go through. Yeah, they didn't have to do this. So there's a mole there. See. Finally, and most interesting for subsequent events, Olaf Ashkeberg, the Swedish banker, was a prominent participant and an intermediate in the negotiations on behalf of Guaranty Trust. Let us therefore take a closer look at Olaf Ashkeberg, ASCH. Olaf Ashberg in New York, 1916, is a Bolshevik banker, or Banker der Welten Revolution, as he had been called in German press, was owner of the NYA Banken, founded in 1912 in Stockholm. His co-directors included prominent members of the Swedish Corporation Cooperatives and Swedish Socialists, including G.W. Dahl, D-A-H-L, K.G. Roslin, and C. Gerhard Magnusson. In 1918, Nile Banking was placed on the Allied blacklist for its financial operations on behalf of Germany. So this guy's a bad dude. In response to the blacklisting, Nile Banking changed its name to oh wow, he changed the name of his bank. Okay, the bank remained under the control of Ashkeberg and was mainly owned by him. The bank, I wonder if this is all a setup. This was like a one-man deal, banker almost deal here, almost is what I'm getting. The bank remained under the contract and control of Ashkeberg and was mainly owned by him. The Bank London's agent was the British Bank of North Commerce, whose chairman was Earl Grey, former associate of Cecil Rhodes. Earl Grey. I think some writings are actually in the Tavistock book. It's possible. Others in the Ashkeberg interesting circle of business associates including Krassin, Krassin, who was until the Bolshevik Revolution, when he changed color to emerge as a leading Bolshevik Russian manager of Siemens / Schuckwerk in Petrograd. Karl Furstenberg, Minister of Finance in the first Bolshevik government, and Max May, Vice President in charge of federal foreign operations for Guaranty Trust in New York, and Olaf Ashkeberg, who's so highly of Max May that a photograph of May is included in Ashberg's book. Now, what they did is they threw out a legal government and put in an illegal one so that they could make money, folks. That's the bottom line. And allow them to draw up new contracts in order to benefit themselves. That's what this is about. It has nothing to do with the people. In fact, they don't care anything about the people. They let Lenin and Trotsky run wild. It didn't matter to them. It didn't matter. In the summer of 1916, Olaf Ashkeberg was in New York representing both Nile Banker and Pierre Bark, the Tsarist Minister of Finance. So this is before the takeover. Ashkeberg, Prime Minister in New York, according to the New York Times, August 4th, 1916, was to negotiate a $50 million loan for Russia with an American banking syndicate headed by Stillman, that is, National City Bank. This business was concluded on June 5th, 1916. The results were a Russian credit of $50 million in New York at a bank charged of 7.5% per annual. That's pretty expensive interest rate. And a corresponding 150 million ruble credit for the NCB syndicate in Russia. That's from the National City Bank. New York syndicate then turned around and issued 6.5% certificates in its own name in the U.S. market to the amount of $50 million. Thus, the National City Bank syndicate made a profit on the $50 million loan to Russia, floated it on the American market for another profit, and obtained 150 million ruble credit in Russia. You see, these people have so much money that they're willing to dare to do all kinds of bad things. During his New York visit on behalf of the Tsarist Russian government, Ashkenazi made some prophetic comments concerning the future for America and Russia. The opening for American capital and American initiative with the awakening brought by the war will be countrywide when the struggle is over. There are now many Americans in Petrograd, representatives of business firms, keeping in touch with the situation. As soon as the change comes, a huge American trade with Russia should spring up. So the corporations are there to seize and take from the Russians and to do what they want and create their own businesses there. While this SARS loan operation was being floated in New York, Niles banker, that is, Alola Ashkenazi, were funneling funds from the German government to Russian revolutionaries who would eventually bring down the Kerensky Committee and establish the Bolshevik regime. The evidence for Alola Ashkenazi's intimate connections with financing the Bolshevik Revolution comes from several sources, some of greater value than others. The Niles banker and Ashkenazi are prominently cited in the Siston papers. That was in chapter 3. However, George Kennett has systematically analyzed these papers and shown them to be forged, although they are probably based in part on authentic material. Other evidence originates with Colonel B.P. Nikitine, Nikitine, in charge of counterintelligence in the Kerensky government, and consisted of 29 telegrams transmitted from Stockholm to Petrograd and vice versa regarding finances of the Bolsheviks. Three of these telegrams refer to banks. Telegram 10, 11 refer to Neo Banker, and Telegram 14 refers to the Russian Asiatic Bank in Petrograd. Telegram 10 reads as follows. Funds very low, cannot assist if really urgent, give 500 at last payment pencils, huge loss, originally hopeless, instructs now bankers, cable further, 100,000 Sumson. Telegram 11 reads, let's see if I can pronounce this guy's name. Kolovsky, I'll just spell it to you. Kozlovsky, Sergei Viscado, 81, first letters received, now banker, telegram, cable unto Solomon, offering local telegraphic agency refers to Bronck, Bronck, Save Lakovich, Bilal. Sorry for I don't know much Russian language here, or Swedish. Furstenberg was the immediate between Parvus, remember, Alexander I, Helpan, and the German government, and about these transfers, Michael Futrell concludes. So all these are underhanded people in government positions that are actually doing all this. Okay? They do it today too, folks. Don't doubt that. It was discovered that during the last few months, that is, Evgenia Simerson, had received nearly 1 million rubles from Furstenberg through the Niles banker in Stockholm, and that this money came from German sources. Telegram 14 of the Nikitine series reads, Furstenberg, Solijabotin, number 90, period, 100,000 into Russian Asian Summerson. The U.S. representative for Russian Asiatic was McGregory Grant Company at 120 Broadway, New York City, and the bank was financed by Guarantee Trust in the U.S. and Niles Banker in Sweden. Another mention of the Niles Banker is the material that the charges against the Bolsheviks, which was published in the Kerensky period. Particularly noteworthy is that the material is a document signed by Gregory Alexinsky, a former member of the Second State Duma. Duma is the government of Russia, in reference to monetary transfers to the Bolsheviks. The document in part reads as follows. In accordance with the information just received, these trusted persons of Stockholm were the Bolshevik Jacob Furstenberg, better known under the name of Gant, G-A-N-E-T-S-K-I-L, and Parvus, Dr. Helfhan, and Petrograd, the Bolshevik attorney M.D.U. Koldovsky, and a woman relative of Hanek, Hanecki, Summerton, engaged in speculations together with Haneken and others. Koldovsky is the chief receiver of German money, which is transferred from Berlin through the Dutch Count Geschaffen to the Stockholm via a bank, and thence to the Siberian Bank in Petrograd, where his account at present has a balance of over 2 million rubles. The military censorship has unearthed an uninterrupted exchange of telegrams of a political and financial nature between the German agents and the Bolshevik leaders. Further, there is the State Department files a green cipher message from the U.S. Embassy in Christiania named Oslo in 1925, so the name changed, Norway, dated February 21st, 1918, that reads, am informed that Bolshevik funds are deposited in Neil Banker in Stockholm. Litigation Stockholm advisor there. Finally, Michael Fertel, who's interviewed Olaf Aschenberg just before his death, concludes that the Bolshevik funds were indeed transferred from Germany through Niels Banker and Jacob Furstenberg in the guise of payment for goods shipped, according to Fertel. Aschenberg confirmed to him that Fuskenberg had a commercial business with Niels Banker and that Fuskenberg had also sent funds to Petrograd. These statements are authenticated in Aschenberg's memories, see page 70. In sum, Aschenberg, through the Niels Banker, was undoubtedly a channel for funds used in the Bolshevik Revolution, and Guaranty Trust was indirectly linked through the association with Aschenberg and an interest in McGregory Grant Company, New York, agent of the Russo-Asiatic Bank, another transfer vehicle. Next section is Niels Banker and Guaranty Trust joined Ruskobank. That's Ruskombank. Several years later, in the fall of 1922, the Soviets formed their first international bank. It was based on a syndicate that involved the former Russian private bankers and some new investments from Germany, Swedish, American, and British bankers, known as Ruskoban, Foreign Commercial Bank of the Bank of Foreign Commerce. It was headed by Olaf Aschenberg again. Its board consists of Tsar's private bankers, representative of German, Swedish, and American banks, and of course, representatives of the Soviet Union. The U.S. Stockholm litigation reported to Washington on this question and noted in a reference to Aschenberg, stating that his reputation is poor. He was referred to in document 54 of the Siskin's documents in dispatch number 138 of January 4th, 1921, from a litigation of Copenhagen. The foreign bankers consortium involved in the Rusko Bank represented mainly British capital. It included Russian Asiatic Consolidated Limited, which was one of the largest private creditors of Russia and which was granted $3 million by the Soviets to compensate for damages to its property in the Soviet Union by nationalization. The British government itself had already purchased substantial interest in the Russian private bank. According to a State Department report, the British government is heavily invested in the consortium in question. The consortium was granted essentially concessions in Russia, and the bank had its share capital of 10 million gold rubles. A report in the Danish newspaper National Tidende stated that possibilities had been created for cooperation with the Soviet government, where this, by political negotiations, would have been impossible. In other words, as the newspaper goes on to say, the politicians had failed to achieve cooperation with the Soviets, but it may be taken for granted that the capitalistic exploitation of Russia is beginning to assume more definite forms. In early October 1922, so this is after 5 years, almost 5 years to the Bolshevik Revolution has succeeded, Olaf Aschenberg met in Berlin with Emil Wittenberg, director of the National Bank for Deutschland, and Schurtermann, head of the Russian State Bank. After discussing concerning German involvement in the Ruskoban, the three bankers went to Stockholm and there met with Max May, vice president of Guaranty Trust Company. Max May was then the designated director of the Foreign Direct Division of Ruskobank, in addition to Seshenton, former head of the Moscow Merchant Bank. Kalashchins, former head of the Junker Bank, which is I think is a German bank, and Tenevoskis, former head of the Siberian Bank. The last bank had been partially purchased by the British government in 1918. Professor Gustav Cassel of Sweden agreed to act as advisor to Ruskobank. Marcel was quoted in the Swedish newspaper on October 17, 1922, and it follows. That a bank has now been started in Russia to take care of purely banking matters is a great step forward, and it seems to me that the bank was established in order to do something to create a new economy life in Russia. What Russia needs is a bank to create internal and external commerce. If there is to be any business between Russia and other countries, there must be a bank to handle it. This step forward should be supported in every way by other countries, and when I was asked my advice, I stated that I was prepared to give it. I am not in favor of a negative policy and believe that every opportunity should be seized to help in a positive reconstruction. The great question is how to bring the Russian exchange bank to normal. It is a complicated question and will necessitate through investigation. To solve this problem, I am naturally more than willing to take part in the work. To leave Russia to her own resources and her own fate is folly. The former Siberian Bank building in Petrograd was used as the head office of Russian Bank, whose objectives were to raise short-term loans in foreign countries to induce foreign capital into Soviet Union and generally to facilitate Russian overseas trade. It opened on December 1st, 1922 in Moscow and employed about 300 persons. In Sweden, the Russian Bank was represented by the Sovetsky. That's like a Swedish name. I can't pronounce. I'm sorry. SV, I guess it's Svensk, I don't know. Sorry, of Stockholm, Olaus Askenberg, now a banker, under a new name, and in Germany by the Garantie and Credit Bank for Den Osten of Berlin. In the United States, the bank was represented by the Guarantee Trust Company of New York. On opening the bank, Olaus Askenberg commented, "The new bank will look after the purchasing of machinery and raw materials from England and the United States, and it will give guarantees for the completion of contracts. The question of purchasing in Sweden has not yet arisen, but it is hoped that such will be will be the case later on." On joining Ruskin Bank, Max May of Guarantee Trust made a similar statement. The United States, being a rich country with a well-developed industry, does not need to import anything from foreign countries, but it is greatly interested in exporting its products to other countries and considers Russia the most suitable market for that purpose. See, that's the real ultimate maiden here, folks. Taking into consideration the vast requirement of Russia in all lines of economic life. May stated that the Russian commercial bank was very important, that it would largely finance all lines of Russian industries. From the very beginning, the operation of Russian Bank was restricted by the Soviet foreign trade monopoly. The bank had difficulty in obtaining advances on Russian goods deposited abroad because they were transmitted in the name of Soviet trade delegations. A great deal of Russian Bank funds were looked up in deposits with the Russian State Bank. Finally, in early 1924, the Russian commercial bank was fused with the Soviet foreign trade commissaire, and Olaus Askenberg was dismissed from his position at the bank because it was claimed in Moscow he had misused bank funds. His original connection with the bank was because of the friendship with Maxim Lemanov. Through this association, so runs a State Department report. Olaus Askenberg had access to large sums of money for the purpose of meeting payments on goods ordered by the Soviets in Europe. Too much money around was too easy to hold on, too easy to let go. Sorry. These sums apparently were placed in Economist, a private banking company owned by Mr. Askenberg. Again, is now alleging that a large portion of these funds were employed by Mr. Askenberg for making investments for his personal account, and that he is now endeavoring to maintain his position in the bank through his possessions of this money. According to my informer, Mr. Askenberg had not been the sole one to profit by his operations with the Soviet funds, but had divided the gains with those who were responsible for his appointment in the Russian commercial bank, among them being the Taval. The Russian Bank then became Vnestor, by which it is known today. That's spelled Vnestorg. We now have to retrace our steps and took at the activities of Ashkenberg, New York Associate Guarantee Trust Company during World War I to lay the foundation for re-examination or examination of its role in the Revolutionary era in Russia. This section is called Guarantee Trust and German Espionage in the United States in 1914 to 1917. During World War I, Germany raised considerable funds in New York for espionage and covert operations in North America and South America. It is important to record the flow of these funds because it runs from the same firms, Guarantee Trust and American International Corporation, that were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution and its aftermath, not to mention the fact outlined in Chapter 3 that the German government also financed Linden's revolutionary activities. Yeah, this is I believe this American International Corporation is a setup that is just not really, it's just there in name only. You see, and they use that if people were, it's just a way of exchanging money back and forth. A summary of the loans granted by American banks to German interests in World War I was given to the 1919 Overman Committee of the United States Senate by U.S. military intelligence. The summary was based on the disposition of Carl Hagman, who came to the United States in April 1915 to assist Dr. Albert with the commercial and financial affairs of the German government. Hayden, Haynen, official work was the transportation of goods from the United States to Germany by way of Sweden, Switzerland, and Holland. In fact, he was up to his ears in covert operations. The major German loans raised in the United States between 1915 and 1918, according to Hendon, were as follows. The first loan of $400,000 was made about September 1914 by the investment bank Kuhn, Lowe and Company. Collateral of 25 million marks was deposited with Max M. Warburg in Hamburg. So Paul Warburg is the other one who was involved in the Jekyll Island deal. Just to remember that. And I've done videos also on the whole area of what we call the Eustace Mullins book, the Federal Reserve Bank. See. So Maxim Warburg in Hamburg, the German affiliate of Kuhn, Lowe and Company, Captain George B. Lester of U.S. military intelligence told the Senate that Hayner replied to the question, "Why did you go to Kuhn, Lowe and Company?" As Kuhn, Lowe and Company, we considered the natural bankers of the German government and the Reichsbank. The second loan of $1.3 million did not come directly from the United States, but was negotiated by John Simon, an agent of the pseudo-Dutch discontinued Geschäften, to secure funds for making shipments to Germany. The third loan was from Chase National Bank in the Morgan Group, that is, in the amount of $3 million. The fourth loan was from Mechanics and Metals National Bank in the amount of $1 million. These loans financed the Germans' espionage activities in the United States and Mexico. Some funds were traced to Sommerfeld, who was an advisor to von Rittenlin, another German espionage agent, and who was later associated with Hajar Schock and Emil Wittenberg. Sommerfeld was to purchase ammunition for use in Mexico. So this is all being, wow, this is amazing. They've got agents that are doing this. Foreign agents. He had an account with the Guarantee Trust Company, and from the payments were made to Western Cartridge Company of Alton, Illinois, for ammunition that was shipped to El Paso for use in Mexico by Pancho Villa's bandits. About $400,000 was spent on ammunition, Mexican propaganda, and similar activities. The then German ambassador, Count von Bernstock, had recounted his friendship with Adolf von Panderstock, a senior partner at Amsterdam and Company, which was controlled and in November 1917 owned by the American International Corporation. American International figures prominently in later chapters in board of directors, contained the key names on Wall Street, such as Rockefeller, Kahn, Stillman, DuPont, Winthrop, etc. According to von Brissock, von Pastel was intimately acquainted with all the members of the embassy. Von Vestock himself regarded von Packenstock as one of the most respected, if not the most respected, Imperial German in New York. Indeed, von Packenstock was for many years a chief paymaster of the German spy system in the country. In other words, there is no question that Armstead and Company, controlled by American International Corporation, was ultimately associated with the funding of German wartime espionage in the United States. To clinch von Berkenstock's last statement, there exists a photograph of a check in favor of Armstead and Company dated December 8, 1917, just 4 weeks after the start of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Signed von Papen. Wow. Another German espionage operator. And having a counterfoil bearing the notion traveling expenses on von Badel, French Schroders, who published the photograph, has stated that the check is evidence that von Papen became accessible after the fact to a crime against American laws. It is also makes Armstead and Company subject to a similar charge. I wonder if he's talking about the same von Papen who eventually takes over later on in Germany. Just curious. Paul Bolo-Paschke, yet another German espionage agent and prominent French financier formerly in the service of the Egyptian government, arrived at New York in March 1916 with a letter of introduction to von Pastenstel. Through the letter, Bolo-Paschke met Hugo Smith, director of the Dutch Bank in Berlin, and his representatives in the United States. One of Bolo-Paschke's projects was to purchase foreign newspapers so as to slant their editorials in favor of Germany. Funds for this program was arranged in Berlin in the form of credit with the Guarantee Trust Company, with the credit subsequently made available to Armstead and Company. Adolf von Papenstock of Armstead in turn made the funds available to Bolo-Paschke. So you see how this money is being exchanged here. It's also, this is propaganda here. All this is, you see what's going on is propaganda. In other words, both Guarantee Trust Company and the Armstead and Company, a subsidiary of American International Corporation, were directly involved in the implementations of German espionage and other activities in the United States. Some links can be established from these firms to each of these major German operations in the United States. Dr. Albert, Karl Helton, von Ritteten, von Papen, Count Jacques Manatal, and Paul Bolo-Paschke. In 1919, the Senate Overman Committee was established that Guarantee Trust had an active role in financing German World War I efforts in an unneutral manner. The testimony of U.S. intelligence officer Becker makes this clear. In addition, Hugo Smith, is a Dutch bank, was very largely assisted by a certain American banking institution. It was while we were neutral, but they acted to the detriment of the British interests. And I have considerable data on the activities of Guarantee Trust Company in that respect, and would like to know whether the committee wishes me to go into it. Senator Nelson, that is a branch of Citibank, is it not? No. Senator Overman, it was a inimical to British interest. It was unneutral, and I think you had better let it come out. Senator King, was it an ordinary banking transaction? Mr. Becker, that would be a matter of opinion. It has to do with camouflaging exchange so as to make it appear to be neutral exchange when it was really German exchange on London. As a result of these operations, in which the Guarantee Trust Company mainly participated between August 1st, 1914, and the time America entered the war, the Dutch Bank and its branches in South America succeeded in negotiating $4,670,000 of London exchange in wartime. Senator Overman, I think that is competent. What is really important is not so much the financial assistance was given to Germany, which was only illegal, as the directors of Guarantee Trust were financial assistance to the Allies at the same time. In other words, Guarantee Trust was financing both sides of the conflict. This raises the question of morality. Continue. The next section is called the Guarantee Trust Minuto Kaligowski thread. Count Joshua Mendenhall is a most unlikely but verifiable and persistent thread that links the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia with the German banks. Germany, World War I, espionage in the United States, the Guarantee Trust Company in New York, the aborted French Bolshevik Revolution and the related Calais-Malibu espionage trials in France. Jacques Minolta was born February 17, 1891 in Berlin, the son of the Austrian father, descended from Italian nobility, and a German mother. Young Minolta was educated in Berlin and then entered employment with the Dutch Bank in Berlin in 1912. Almost immediately, Minolta was sent to the United States as an assistant to Hugo Smith, deputy director of the Dutch Bank and its New York representatives. After a year in New York, Minolta was sent back to the Dutch Bank to London, where he circulated in prominent political and diplomatic circles. At the outbreak of World War I, Minolta returned to the United States and immediately met with the German ambassador Can von Wessenstahl, after which he entered the employ of Guaranty Trust Company in New York. At Guaranty Trust, Minolta was under the direct orders of Max May, director of the Foreign Department and his associate of Swedish banker Olof Ashkeberg. Minolta was no minor banking official. The interrogations of the Calais trials in Paris in 1919 established that Minolta worked directly under Max May. On October 25, 1914, Guaranty Trust sent Jacques Monet in South America to make a report on the political, financial, and commercial situation. As he did in London, Washington, and New York, so Minolta moved into the highest diplomatic and political circles here. One purpose of Minolta's mission in Latin America was to establish a mechanism by which Guaranty Trust could be used as an intermediary for the previous mentioned German fund raising on the London money market, which was then denied to Germany because of World War I. Minolta returned to the United States, renewed his association with Count von Wessenstahl and Count Luxemburg, and subsequently, in 1916, attempted to attain a position with U.S. naval intelligence. After this, he was arrested on charges of pro-German activities. When arrested, Minolta was working at the Chicago plant of his father-in-law, Louis Swift, of Swift and Company, that is, meat packers. Swift put up the security for $50,000 bond required to free Minolta, who was represented by Henry Vetter, the Swift and Company attorney. Louis Swift was himself arrested for pro-German activities at a later date. An interesting and not important coincidence, Major Harry H. Swift, brother of Louis Swift, was a member of the William Boyce Thompson of the 1917 Red Cross mission to Petrograd. That is one of the groups of Wall Street lawyers and businessmen whose intimate connections with the Russian Revolution are to be described later. Helen Swift Nielsen, sister of Louis and Harold Swift, was later connected with the pro-communist Abraham Lincoln Center unity called the establishment, a minor link between German banks, American banks, German espionage, and as well, we shall see later, the Bolshevik Revolution. Joseph Calas was a famous, sometimes called notorious French politician. He was also associated with Count Minolta in the latter Latin American operations from Guaranty Trust and was later implicated in the famous French espionage case of 1919, which had Bolshevik connections. In 1990, hold on a second here. Let me see what I got here. In 1911, Calas became Minister of Finance and later in the same year became Premier of France. John Louis Malby, M-A-L-B-Y, became Undersecretary of State in Calas' government. Several years later, Madame Calas murdered Gaston Calmette, spell that for you, I guess it's correct, C-A-L-M-E-T-T-E, Calmette, editor of the prominent Paris newspaper Figaro, I guess it's F-I-G-A-R-O, Figaro. Anyway, the prosecution charged that Madame Calas murdered Calmette to prevent publication of certain compromising documents. This affair resulted in the departure of Calas and his wife from France. The couple went to Latin America and there met Count Minolta, the agent of the Guaranty Trust Company, who was in Latin America to establish intermediaries for German finances. Count Minolta was socially connected with the Calas couple in Rio de Janeiro and San Pedro, Brazil, and Montevideo in Uruguay, and in Buenos I can't even say this, Buenos Aires, Argentina. So this guy is everywhere. I mean, he's in the major cities. He's in all these, what I would call, all these are major cities in Brazil, Uruguay, and also in Argentina. In other words, Count Manotta was a constant companion of the Carlos couple while they were in Latin America. Returning to France, Carlos and his wife stayed at Biarritz as guests of Paul Bello Pasha, who was, as we have seen, also a German espionage operator in the United States and France. Later in July of 1915, Count Manotta arrived in France from Italy, met with Carlos couple. The same year, Carlos couple also visited Bello Pasha again in Biarritz. In other words, in 1915 and 1916, these guys established not only a continuous social relationship with Count Manotta and Bello Pasha, both of whom were German espionage agents in the United States. Bello Pasha's work in France was to gain influence from Germany in the Paris newspaper Le Temps and Figaro. Bello Pasha then went to New York, arriving February 24, 1916. Here he was to negotiate a loan of $2 million. And here he was associated with von Postustov, the prominent German agent with Amistad and Company. This is amazing. This blows my mind. And this goes on today too, folks. This goes on all. This has not stopped. Okay, it's just not this time. It didn't happen just then. I mean, it did, but I'm just, Severus and Johnson in The Enemy Within has connected Carlos and Malaby to the 1918 aborted French Bolshevik Revolution and states that if the revolution had succeeded, Malaby would have been the Trotsky of France had Carlos been in its Lenin. In other words, they would work together as Lenin and Trotsky were. I didn't even know that it actually tried to overthrow France in 1916. Wow. The French Bolshevik Revolution and states that if the revolution had succeeded, again, it's been, okay, I'm gone. Carlos and Marty formed two radical socialist parties in France using German funds. So what is Germany all up to here, folks? What's going on? What's going on? So the funds were brought to trial for these subversive efforts. The court interrogations, in the 1919 French espionage trials introduced testimony concerning New York bankers and the relationship with these German espionage operators. They also set forth the link between Count Manotta and Callias, as well as the relationship of the Guarantee Trust Company to the Deutsche Bank and the cooperation between Hugo Smith of Deutsche Bank and Max May of Guarantee Trust Company. French interrogator has the following extract from the New York deposition of Count Manotta on page 10. Question: under whose orders were you at Guarantee Trust? Reply: under the orders of Mr. Max May. Question: he was a vice president. He was a vice president and director of Foreign Department. Later in 1922, Max May became a director of the Soviet Rushcom Bank and represented the interests of Guarantee Trust in that bank. The French interrogator established that Count Manotta, a German espionage agent, was in the employ of Guarantee Trust Company, that Max May was his superior officer, and that Max May was also closely associated with Bolshevik banker Olaf Oschenberg. In brief, Max May of Guarantee Trust was linked to illegal fundraising and German espionage in the United States during World War I. He was linked indirectly to the Bolshevik Revolution and directly to the establishment of Rushcombank, the first international bank in the Soviet Union. It is too early to attempt an explanation for the seemingly inconsistent, illegal, and sometimes immoral international activity. In general, there are two possible explanations, the first being a relentless search for profits. The second, which agrees with the words of Otto Kahn of Kumlo and Company and of American International Corporation in the epigraph to this chapter, the realization of socialist aims which should and can be brought about by non-socialist means. Some of the footnotes he has here is by The Truth About the Trust by John Moody. He shares that. He also has another particular one here. The J.P. Morgan Company was originally founded in London as George Peabody and Company in 1838. He was not incorporated until March 21st, 1940. The company ceased to exist in April of 1954 when it merged with the Guaranty Trust Company, when its most important commercial bank subsidiary, and today is known as the Morgan Guaranty Trust Company of New York. Let's see if there's any other particular ones here. Yeah, the Lincoln Stefflers, the Letters of Lincoln Stefflers by Harcourt, Brace and Company in 1941. U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, that would be that. U.S. Senate Relations, Foreign Relations and Investigation of Mexican Affairs in 1920. And then C. Robert Paul Browder and Alexander F. Kerensky, the Russian Provisional Government, from the Stanford University Press. I'm assuming that's probably written by him. That is Mr. Anthony C. Sutton, since he took a grave interest in this. Okay, I think that's going to conclude Chapter 4 today. I appreciate you being here. Chapter 5 will be dealing with another group called the American Red Cross Mission in Russia. And this is the one, if I recollect, 20 or 30 years ago, this is a group that's actually involved in, they're still transferring money. They are involved in this also. So this is amazing. In fact, it says real quick here, it said, in part of Chapter 5, poor Mr. Billings believed he was in charge of a scientific mission for the relief of Russia. He was in reality nothing but a mask. Red Cross complexion of the mission was nothing but a mask. So you got to wonder yourself, folks, when it was used this time, American Red Cross back then, is it being used today? Yeah, probably. Although I would suggest you never give any money to the Red Cross, ever. That money does not go to any victims, hardly at all. He's lucky if it gets down to 10%. Most money is to their benefit. They're basically what I call a 501(c)(3) corporation. So, and there are others, but American Red Cross is one of the ones that stands out. And I'm sure there are other groups out there who do the same thing. It's kind of sad, isn't it? People thinking they're giving their money to help people. In reality, it's not even getting there. You see. So thank you for being here. Appreciate your attention. Hope it was enlightening for you. Again, Anthony C. Sutton is basically what he's doing is simply he's going back to State Department files and is basically looking at what they're talking about, plus other information from others, and seeing how many players are involved in this. And it seems as though the bankers have found their players. You see, they found their stooges, or whatever you want to call it, their spies that are working in foreign governments. And it's, as far as I can tell, a lot of it simply is about making money. But it's also propped up governments that actually harm people and harm millions and millions of people. But bankers don't look at it that way, folks. They don't see that. All they look at is the money figures that they can make. And all of them make money, you see. They profit off of this immensely. And that's how it works. And it's really sad. If there wasn't such a thing, maybe someone say if there was such thing as money, would this occur? I don't know. That's just interesting. The problem simply is that most people have a belief that money has value and it's used in, throughout the world. And so that's why people do this, because they profit off of it. But in reality, simply is that it's not gold and silver, you see. And sometime we'll talk about what I call in later broadcasts is to, why are we not using what I call true money, that is gold and silver? That's what the Constitution requires. So why are we using this faulty money, this notes which cannot pay anything? You see, it's a really sad situation, and most people work all their lives seriously, and really never attain anything of value. And in the United States, in the last 10 years, if not longer, are seeing what I call the destruction of what has been going on for a long time, but the destruction of the middle class. So they fell another rung down. And what is participating, what's taking place now is that you have a small group of people at the very top, and then there's a very small middle class. And once that goes away, you're going to have some big issues in this country, because what's going to happen, the poor are going to be down here, and they're not seeing any hope of moving up to the middle class. And that's what was always the hope of the United States was to ascend to the next class, which was the middle class, to be able to afford things such and such. But when you destroy that hope, what happens? You see. But anyway, appreciate you being here for over an hour. Appreciate your comments. Thank you for your listening, and hope that you learned quite a bit today. And you take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I was going to say one other thing. If you look for my videos, look under the live videos, which would be under YouTube and also Odyssey. But I'm having an issue with Odyssey. They have not been carrying over my videos for the last 4 or 5 days. So I don't know what's going on. So we'll see what happens. But thank you for being here. Take care. Bye-bye.